Hello JBS viewers, welcome to the ISGAP Hour. I'm David Harris, Executive Vice Chair of ISGAP, and as always I'm joined by the visionary founder and CEO of ISGAP, Dr. Charles Small. But before turning to Charles, I just wanted to say a few words about why I chose to become involved with ISGAP. Because I saw in the last couple of years the rise in anti-Semitism throughout American society, but particularly focused on our universities, which are the training grounds for the future leadership of the United States. And I have some sense of the Jewish organizational landscape and the broader organizational landscape from my many decades of work in the fields. And I came to the conclusion after doing my homework that while many organizations have noble purposes and are doing helpful things, too many, quite frankly, are focused on the symptoms, and not enough have been focused on the root causes of why we are facing the situation we are. Why have universities so radically changed? When my own children, 20 years or so ago, were at university, they were very safe spaces for Jewish students and for Friends of Israel. And 20 years later, in many cases, those Jewish students have to wear body armor, so to speak, in order to defend their Jewish identity and their support for Israel. What changed? And I came to the conclusion that ISGAP, perhaps uniquely on the American organizational landscape, Jewish and non-Jewish, was investigating the root causes and identifying them. And two in particular that I would mention. The first was dating back to a Columbia University professor named Edward Said, who on the opposing side, very cleverly, almost prophetically, began to implant his views of the Middle East in future generations of scholars, not just at Columbia, but at top institutions across the country and even beyond America's borders, so that even after he would pass the scene, his ideology would be deeply rooted, ever more so, in the American higher education landscape. And that was dangerous for all of us, number one. And ISGAP was blowing the whistle on this and saying, where are the counter voices to the Edward Saidization of American higher education? We need to create them. We need to educate them. We need to train them. We need to encourage them. We need to inspire them. And ISGAP has been doing exactly that. And number two, is there a money trail? Or did all of this somehow magically happen on a dime? And ISGAP assembled an extraordinary team of forensic accountants with real serious experience in this space. And lo and behold, they began to uncover not millions, but billions of dollars coming from nefarious places overseas, making their way to American universities, and not simply for the goal of enhancing the teaching of French literature, but rather for the purpose of creating a new indoctrination, if you will, a new ideology, if you will. And we're seeing the consequences of that. So I joined ISGAP essentially to say, sure, organizations issue statements, visit campuses, have photos with the students, invite them to conferences. That's all good. It's all helpful. It's all encouraging. But if we're going to get to the bottom of these issues, we've got to go way deeper. And the one organization I knew that was going way deeper was ISGAP. Hence, my decision to become involved and my pride in joining with you, Charles Small, in pursuing this. Having said that, talk to us now about the top 2 or 3 priorities for ISGAP on the research and policy front.
So first of all, I would like to say one of the greatest achievements that I've had at ISGAP, and I think one of the greatest achievements that ISGAP has done, is to attract great scholars and great leaders, and certainly you. You really elevated the work of ISGAP to a new level, and our whole team is indebted, and I think given your leadership over the many decades in the community And now with ISGAP, you're really taking us to new levels, and our work is becoming more impactful, really thanks in large part to you. So really, and there's a lot of appreciation for your efforts, so thank you.
But don't worry, JBS, we're not leaving JBS based on what Charles said and defecting to CNN or Fox or the BBC. Not even close. We're sticking with JBS.
And for the record, CNN just signed an agreement with Qatar.
There you go.
And BBC is working with Qatar.
There
So
you
there's
go.
no hope that ISGAP, and we're not leaving yet.
So Charles, give us the top 2 or 3 research and policy priorities today, winter 2025.
So I think we do work in the academic space, and we get the best minds really on this subject matter from an interdisciplinary perspective to inform policy. So on the academic side, ISGAP is building up its postdoctoral training program. For the first time, we're training young scholars who will be future professors on issues of contemporary
So
antisemitism.
the counter voices to the Edward Saidization
Correct.
of higher education.
Yeah. We've been invited. We have a small research center at Cambridge University in the UK, and it's expanding, which is wonderful.
One of the great universities in the world.
Absolutely. We're trying to work with American universities, and we're having some more traction. We'll keep you posted on that. We're also, in the next few months, launching a very important journal. It's the Journal of Alterity Studies, the Journal of Otherness. And we're going to be focusing on issues of anti-Semitism, racism, human rights, and other forms of discrimination, sexism, because many of the social movements that are using anti-Semitism to attract its supporters are also, sexist and homophobic and racist, and they don't recognize the other. So it's a journal of scholars, top scholars from around the world, and we're being housed at one of the best publishing houses in Oxford, which is a good development for our academic pedigree. And we'll have some of the best minds really focusing on these issues that will inform our research, our publications, and policy. In terms of our policy and our research projects, as many of the viewers know, and as you mentioned, our most important project now is Follow the Money. It's expanding. We have a great team of forensic experts on terror financing, experts on radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood, and also on anti-Semitism. We're coming out with a report on Georgetown University, which may be our most impactful report yet. It really exposes the Muslim Brotherhood with Qatari money, its infiltration in academia and academic discourse at our best universities. These are the universities that young Americans learn to be citizens. These are our future leaders. And how at Georgetown...
And in the case of Georgetown, many of them end up in government service, public service, of course.
Georgetown has one of the most important
School of Foreign Service.
Exactly. And a lot of these graduates go into government, into the State Department. So it's an operation by the Muslim Brotherhood to infiltrate the most important institutions in our society and to change the discourse and to change the political views when it comes to democracy, when it comes to the rights of all citizens, minorities, and Jews, and anti-Semitism and other forms of anti-democratic ideologies which are becoming more and more embedded in our society.
So what do you want government to do now as a result of what you're discovering through research?
Right. So we are, through our research...
If you could wave a magic wand, Charles, what would government do? And hopefully in a bipartisan fashion, but...
Correct. So on April the 9th, you'll be there. ISGAP is having a one-day event in Washington, D.C., where we're inviting policymakers, congressional Senate leaders, think tank experts to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. Our goal is to try to ban the Muslim Brotherhood from the United States of America.
Why?
The Muslim Brotherhood is not only anti-American, it's anti-democratic. It wants to destroy democratic countries and replace it with a radical Islamist, jihadist caliphate.
How do you know, and what do you say to those who might say you're just conspiracy mongering?
Right. So no, through our research, and one of our other reports that will be coming out in the next month or so is called The Project. We discovered, the FBI and Swiss security police discovered documents from about 40 years ago by the Muslim Brotherhood where they outlined their strategic goal. Their strategic
And these have been authenticated.
Authenticated. This is consistent with their ideology and their strategic mission and goals. They want to move Israel away from the United States and the West, to isolate it, to weaken it and destroy it, and to destroy Israel and murder Jewish people around the world. The Muslim Brotherhood has an ideology that borrows from European anti-Semitism. They take the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Nazi ideology, and I'm saying this very deliberately as a scholar, and merges it and infuses it with a perversion of the great religion of Islam. So the Muslim Brotherhood takes Nazi ideology and anti-Semitism that led to the final solution, that led to the Holocaust, and weaponize it in the contemporary context. So they want to destroy Israel and murder Jewish people around the world. This is the little Satan. They then want to take anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States of America, the great Satan, and destroy America. And if we take a step back, their strategic goals are being realized. They've put a wedge, using universities, using government. They put a wedge, increasingly so, between the United States and Israel. And we see the fragmentation and the emergence of anti-Semitism exploding across the United States, emanating and starting from the classrooms of our great universities in the United States to the campus, to the encampments, from the encampments to the streets, into our media, into our policy institutions. So this is a threat to our democracy.
So if it's such a clear and present danger to our democracy, why has government, whether past administrations or other, why has it been so slow to react?
So I think some countries in the Middle East and now increasingly in Europe are beginning to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a great step.
But the United States?
So in the United States, we have First Amendment, political freedom, which is the strength and wonderful element of the great democracy that the United States is. There have been efforts to ban the Muslim Brotherhood in the past. I wish they would have been successful. But because of the First Amendment and political freedoms, it's very difficult to ban, as it should be, political parties and political ideologies. And in many regards, the violence, if an organization or a political party encourages and carries out violence, then that's grounds for banning. I think until now, until October the 7th, a lot of these conversations as it relates to violence and terrorism in the United States has been theoretical. But now we can clearly demonstrate, after October the 7th, the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood has been transformed into violent action on our campuses and on our streets. The Muslim Brotherhood is inspiring physical violence and terrorism, and I believe this is the grounds, finally, to ban this movement, to ban its organizations that are fronting this ideology based in the United States, to ban them and to get rid of them first and finally and now.
Charles, we only have a couple minutes left because we have a very special guest joining us. But how do you overcome the expected response that this is another form of Islamophobia?
So, one of the tragedies and the successes of radicalism and the Muslim Brotherhood is that they've inserted themselves in Western democratic countries, including the United States, and somehow they've managed to speak for the Muslim community as the authentic voice of Muslims and Islam. And this is a great tragedy, not just for the United States, but for Muslim American citizens who are good citizens, who want to live here peacefully, who are proud to be American. They've been silenced and pushed aside by the well-organized and well-financed, Qatari-based Muslim Brotherhood. And it's time to expose these radical jihadists and to empower American Muslims who are proud to be citizens, who want to live here, who want to be integrated here. There are many generations of Muslims in the United States of America. It's time to work with these American Muslim communities and to, alienate and make illegal the Islamists who are fostering terrorism and hatred in our country.
And very quickly, because we just have a few seconds left, but isn't that a goal that has to be dealt with inside the American Muslim community? Or can outside individuals and organizations influence the outcome successfully?
I believe it has to be two-pronged. There should be an internal conversation taking place, and I believe there is. And people who believe in democracy, Muslim organizations who are proud to be American, who believe in democracy, should be empowered, and we should work with them. But organizations that want to destroy America, murder Jewish people, subjugate women, murder gay people, have no place in a democracy.
Charles, thanks as always for that very edifying conversation. And now for the next segment, we have a very special guest, someone you know well, so I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, David. And for the ISGAP viewers, we're very honored to have Dr. Benjamin Chavis here with us today. Dr. Chavis is actually a new faculty member of ISGAP. He serves with faculty, with our core team of faculty, as well as being on the editorial board of a new journal that we are launching in a few months called the Journal of Alterity Studies, the Journal of Otherness. Dr. Chavis is a professor at Duke University. He was part of the Wilmington 10, which is a long story, but it's a very important story in terms of civil rights and the miscarriage of justice in the United States, which is an ongoing issue. It was a famous case which perhaps we can touch on. Dr. Chavis has also been involved in the civil rights movement throughout his life. He was one of the youngest colleagues of Dr. Martin Luther King in the 1960s and kind of grew up in the civil rights movement and was with a SNCC and other great leaders of the civil rights movement throughout his life. He's also an entrepreneur and an owner of mainly black African-American newspapers in the United States and has a show on PBS. And I'm sure I forgot many other aspects of your work, and it's really an honor that you're here and you're part of our ISGAP team. It's really a special honor, so welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, David. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Okay, so today there's many issues in terms of I know you've taught a course at Duke University, you were saying earlier, on issues of race and ethnicity.
Yes.
In terms of racism and anti-Semitism today in the United States of America, it's not a peaceful, quiet time. It seems to be a rapidly changing time. From your perspective and your background in the civil rights movement, and I know you've also, I haven't mentioned earlier that you were very active on the No Labels campaign with the late, great Senator
Lieberman.
Joseph Lieberman, the senator from Connecticut, who you worked with. So in all your experience, what are the key issues of concern for you in terms of issues of racism, anti-Semitism, and I guess social justice today?
Well, I'm very concerned. One of the reasons why I was so pleased to join ISGAP, because there's a rise of anti-Semitism, even before October the 7th. And there's a rise in racism, white supremacy, far-right extremism. Just a few days ago, a group of Nazis marched into a predominant black community in Cincinnati, Ohio, about 100 of them. And of course, they were not welcomed and sort of repelled. But there seems to be a green light in the consciousness of the far right that they can just go out now and resurrect, Nazism, far-right extremism, and that is co-joined with also the rise of racism. I believe that African Americans should be more vocal against anti-Semitism. And I believe Jewish Americans should be more vocal against racism. We should be working together. I saw firsthand the effectiveness of blacks and Jews working together in the 1960s. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Dr. King were like brothers. And of course, former Senator Joseph Lieberman, who just passed away, Joe and I were like soul brothers, working on anti-Semitism, and we were co-chairs of No Labels when he was alive. So today, we're now in 2025. There's been a sea change politically in America, in Washington, and everybody hopes that the Trump administration will bring people together rather than further divide groups. I'm an observer of history, and I think we should learn from history, not repeat history. And I think that education, one of the things I like about ISGAP is that they have a similar group of scholars from all over the world, because I think part of what is missing is that intellectual truth-telling. is that finding a fact. We don't need fake news about anti-Semitism or fake news about racism. We need truth. We need facts. We need research. And we need people based on the facts and data that's gathered that'll be bold enough to share the analysis of those facts and research. And I think on major college campuses in the United States today, some of that's missing. Well, I would just say a lot of that is missing. And unfortunately, we're going to have generations of young people, first K through 12 and now in college, who are going to be miseducated. They don't know what anti-Semitism means. Some even say, well, I don't know what racism means. So we got our work cut out for us. That's why I think ISGAP is so important, not only in America, but throughout the world.
Benjamin, you spoke about the strong alliance between blacks and Jews in the 1960s, which you were witness to. From your perspective, what happened in the years and decades after those special moments of alliance?
Well, keep in mind the 1960s was the decade of assassinations. John Kennedy, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy. All this led to the election of Richard Nixon in the fall of 1968. And there was a commission that was a congressional commission called the Kerner Commission, because of all of the violence that broke out all across America in the wake of these assassinations. And the Kerner Commission included back then that there were two Americas, one black, one white, separate and apart. Even though in 1954 the Supreme Court had ruled segregation unconstitutional. That was in 1954. And what gave birth to the Civil Rights Movement in 1955, when Emmett Till was killed in Mississippi, the black church led by Dr. King put together the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I was the youth coordinator at the age of 14 for SCLC. And one of the things that Joseph Lieberman and I talked about was the 1963 March on Washington. Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. Lieberman was a young law student in Washington. I was a student activist to get people to come to Washington. And on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, Joe and I went back to the Lincoln Memorial and just kind of reminisced on where we are. So to answer your question, David, what happened was the solidarity between these two communities drifted apart. Why? One is because of what we're doing now. People have very tentative memories of that blacks and Jews not only marched together, but also died together, in Mississippi and other places. And unfortunately, if you would poll people today, they don't know about that. They may have heard about it. I know there's a PBS series getting ready to come out on Eyes on the Prize 3. Eyes on the Prize 1, if you saw that 8-part series, it was like 8-part series on funerals, assassination. And so a lot of young people say, well, I don't want to be in that movement because I don't want to put myself at risk. I don't want all these tragedies. One of the things that I might feel my responsibility today is just not to point to the suffering, not to point to the tragedies, to the disappointments, to the failures. But in a balance, righteousness always wins out. But, you can tell you in the media, sometimes righteousness is not newsworthy. The good news doesn't filter to counter the bad news.
Right.
And so people get polarized. So I think there was a polarization in the early 1970s going into the 1980s. And African American and Jewish leaders just became, there wasn't antimony, but I think there wasn't full solidarity like we used to have. I'm the former head of the NAACP in 1993 and 1994. And of course, the NAACP was founded by blacks and Jews. And the highest medal today in the NAACP is the Springam Award, a Jewish leader of the NAACP. But, you know, if we don't teach this in our schools, if we don't have the right curriculum, and again, this is where ISGAP comes in. We got to challenge the curriculum not only in the colleges, but also K through 12. But again, not just in America, but all over the world, because this is a global problem. Anti-Semitism is an international problem. Racism is a global problem, an international problem. I gave you a long answer to your question.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Benjamin, just following on what you said, do you think the two communities basically drifted apart?
Yes.
Or do you think there were conscious decisions by emerging leaders on both sides that were going our separate ways?
No, I think there was a
And
drift.
if I could just add one
Yes.
final point, fast forwarding to today, do you see the leadership on the horizon in the United States today in both communities that can chart a path bringing us closer together?
First question.
Is it a priority for both communities
Yes.
today?
Let me go with your first question. Yes, it was a drifting apart. I don't think there was a conscious decision by black leaders or Jewish leaders that we're not going to pay attention, we're not going to be inside. It was a drifting. But see, drifting happens when you do not have an avocation as the center of your relationship. There's somewhat of a drawback on college campus. What you see today on college campuses in America just didn't start on October the 7th. That's something that's been gradually growing for a long time. Even the denial of the Holocaust, even the denial of the transatlantic slave trade. You know, it's interesting that postmodernity is almost a denial of modernity, you know, and we don't learn from the history. And that's why it's so important. Now, your other question about today, I think there's still a void, a gap. Now, when tragedy happens, when the synagogue was shot up in Pittsburgh, certainly black leaders came together. And when George Floyd happened, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Jewish leaders responded.
The attack on the AME church in
Right,
Charleston.
in Charleston, right. Charleston has a large Jewish community, a large black community. They came together. But it's something wrong if we only allow tragedies to bring us together. This is my point. We should be preventing tragedies, not responding to tragedies in terms of anti-Semitism and in terms of racism. So I think we have our work cut out for us. And I'm going to just be very honest. I have some of my colleagues in the civil rights movement who recently said, well, Ben, why are you spending time with the Jewish community? I said, well, it's in African Americans' interest to spend time with the Jewish community. And it's in the Jewish community's interest to spend time with the African American. What I mean by spend time, I mean work together, solidarity, join forces to challenge the vestiges of racism, the vestiges of anti-Semitism, and the new forms. We now have AI. My greatest fear of AI is that if we don't...
That's artificial intelligence for our viewers.
Artificial intelligence is that I think intelligence needs to inform artificial intelligence rather than artificial intelligence informing intelligence, if you get my drift.
Totally.
And certainly the case on anti-Semitism, there's these fake anti-definitions of what anti-Semitism is out. We're in a kind of not just a cultural battle, but a media battle for the truth. Most Americans don't really know the history of the Middle East. They don't know the history of Israel. They don't know what the word Zionism really means. Unfortunately, what the United Nations did. So I think that, again, that's why I was so pleased to work with Charles and other colleagues, because I think we got our work cut out for us. But we do it in a way of not being pessimists. We do it in a way by not just being some kind of reactionaries. We should be much more, I use Dr. King's term and Rabbi Heschel's term, prophetic. And what does prophetic mean? It doesn't mean you're foretelling the future. Prophecy, prophetic means, what does God want you to do today, right now? Mm-hmm. Not tomorrow, but today. And we need more of that today.
And Rabbi Heschel would add, we need more prayer with our feet.
Yes.
and not just with our mouths and words.
Exactly. You know,
Charles?
So no, it's very important points that you're making. Thank you. So I'm going to present two scenarios. The other day at CPAC, Steve Bannon gave a Sieg Heil salute, a Nazi salute.
right.
Steve Bannon is a very important ideologue on
And
the
so
right.
did Elon Musk. Now, keep in mind,
Yeah.
this whole salute, using the Hitler salute.
Right. Though we have to say for the record, he denies it.
I know he denied
He says this was a gesture coming from his heart.
I know.
And I think some groups like the ADL gave him a pass on it.
Yeah.
Others have
Right.
not.
My thing is, one of the reasons why
I didn't mean to distract
That's
us, but
good.
just for the record.
But David, I'm glad he denied it, because he has enormous influence over the consciousness of America, in the world. He's one of the richest men in the world.
He
And
also has a Twitter following or an X following of more than 200 million people.
That's correct.
Who
So-
read him every day.
So in my view, he should not come close where people would draw the wrong conclusion of his salute. But let's talk about Steve
Yeah.
Bannon.
Yep.
That was directly a
Right.
Nazi salute.
And if I may, with Elon Musk, it's true he denied it, but I'll say two things. Before he gave the gesture, we'll call it a gesture, he was talking about the need to save civilization, and then he made the gesture. 2 days later, he came out in strong support of the extreme right in Germany
Yeah.
and told them to stop being held back by their past to move forward. So very problematic,
Right.
but and frightening. And going to Bannon, who's also historically close to elements in the Republican Party and President Trump, although they broke apparently in the last few years. He's speaking to a disenfranchised white population in the United States that's increasingly also quite extreme. This is alarming, but this could also be a space for the Jewish community and the African American community to come together to deal with this new threat on the right.
Well, I think
Would you agree?
I agree. But I would say is that I don't believe that Bannon speaks for the majority of Americans,
No.
white Americans. And this whole concept of the extreme right versus the extreme left, but most Americans, black, white, Jewish, Latino, Asian, Native American, are in the middle, who don't make decisions in their early day life based on whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent. I do think in our party system, the party should be much more grassroots-based, consciousness-based, just like now in the congressional break, a lot of these Republicans went back to their districts, kind of ran into some real sore responses to some of the rapid changes that have been going on in terms of all the firings and reducing the federal government. So, but I think this is an opportunity. I would say that this is a responsibility, not just an opportunity, for blacks and Jews to work together anew, reaffirming our historic legacy, but also envisioning how to shape America. Dr. King used to have staff meetings with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he would tell at least those of us who worked in North Carolina, our responsibility is to observe what's going on, but then to take what we have and help shape the future. Blacks and Jews work together. In America, we can help shape a better America.
And so that's important. I'd also want to just touch on the other element. After October the 7th, I think the American Jewish community felt very much alone and even abandoned by their allies, or at least their perceived allies. In the African American community and in popular culture, you know, Kendrick Lamar, sort of being very critical of Drake, who's a Canadian Jewish, very popular rapper. He's been really kind of attacked. There's this ongoing feud in hip hop between the two of them. And in Kendrick Lamar's music, he's using, I would argue, anti-Semitic tropes. In a lot of the popular culture, there's Kanye West selling Nazi t-shirts, swastikas. There's the emergence of the black Hebrews, the black Israelites that are, you know, think that they are the authentic Jews, and Jews like me are kind of white imposters. So there is anti-Semitism in the African American community as perceived certainly by the Jewish community, and I would suspect in the African American community there's some mistrust of the Jewish community. How do we deal with, with the
Well,
younger...
I think both communities, the African American community and Jewish community, have work to do. We shouldn't have a misunderstanding. I would not put Kendrick Lamar and Kanye West in the same.
Yeah. I know my friends would get very upset if I did that.
Yeah, big difference.
Yeah.
Kendrick Lamar's not going out selling swastika shirts, okay? And the thing between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, that's a cultural battle. It is not based on him being an African American and Drake being a Jewish Canadian. It's not based on that. And even some of their lyrics were they're kind of attacking each other lyrically.
Right.
But what are the symbolisms? I think Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Super Bowl, it transcends race, transcends ethnicity. And I think some of Drake's contribution to the evolution of hip-hop culture worldwide also transcends race, transcends ethnicity. And so I predict that the day will come when Drake and Kendrick Lamar will do something together.
I hope.
No, I will.
And for our viewers...
But see, I'm part of the hip-hop.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
too.
for our viewers to know, you've been very active in hip-hop.
Very active in hip-hop.
Yeah.
Still do today introductions to hip-hop albums. And
Nice.
I'm not a rapper, but I sometimes do a little wordsmithing on some of those albums. So I follow very closely the cultural trends in terms of the battles, but these are lyrical, cultural battles. But not, Kendrick Lamar would be very opposed to being characterized as anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Drake would be very opposed to anybody that characterized him as being a racist. So how we use these terms are very, very important, and how we allow people to evolve, no matter where they are. But this is about helping our nation, helping our world be better. And I think that the pendulum of history, I believe, is swinging in the right direction. Despite the rise of the far right in Europe, despite the rise of the far right here in America, I think they're going to go so far to the right, it's going to cause not only a disappointment among their followers, because they're not going to be able to improve the quality of life of the people who vote for them. Because at the end of the day, people want, no matter where you live, no matter what your language, no matter what your religion, people want to raise their children, want to have, be able to live in an environment that's conducive and healthy to being a human being. What I teach now at Duke University, despite what the title is, I teach the oneness of humanity. We're all part of one human family. And I think we don't advocate our oneness. We kind of advocate our separateness. We focus too much on what divides us. We don't focus enough on what unites us.
And Benjamin, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in your classroom at Duke, but do your students embrace the message? Do they push back? Do you see them translating your message outside the classroom?
Very good question, David. And I'm pleased to report to you that both at the undergraduate and graduate level, all of my students embrace what I'm saying. Some feel that they haven't been challenged that way academically before. And I tell my students, look, this is not my class. This is your class. My job is to help you learn. Not just learn to get a good grade in this class. I want you to get a good grade for the rest of your life and contribute something positive to humanity, the oneness of our humanity. And that has been embraced.
And do you see some potential social entrepreneurs in your classrooms who could bring us back to our discussion, help forge a new pathway for African Americans and Jews in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very encouraged. You know, And one of the things I do, I have a program on public broadcasting called the Chavis Chronicles. I bring some representatives of these young people and middle-aged people, because the struggle is intergenerational. It's just not one age group. We all have to work together, no matter what age we are. But I'm very encouraged that I see among young people today, across racial lines, across religious lines, at least a hunger and a thirst for the truth. Where are they going to get the truth? See, that's our job. That's ISGAP's job, and we have to work on working on. That's why I'm so pleased to be a part of ISGAP.
So I wanted to ask you, if I could, on that note, Benjamin, let's fast forward a year or two. What would you hope that your contribution to ISGAP would be that might make a difference in the work of ISGAP, which is first and foremost to fight anti-Semitism, but obviously in the context of societies that respect the rights and dignity of all?
Well, my hope and prayer is that I'm looking forward to this new journal, scholarly journal that we're going to be publishing. And I hope that would be not only in English, but in a lot of different languages around the world. Because again, how does change happen? I think change happens when it's prodded in the right direction. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities. So to answer your question, I want my contributions to ISGAP to be helping to define and redefine what is anti-Semitism, what is racism. I've just written a book on the transatlantic slave trade where I mention the relevance of the Holocaust to the relevance of people today juxtapose, well, whose suffering is more? No, that no suffering, no terrorism should ever be justified. To take a human life should never be justified, no matter what the circumstances. And I think right now we have people who have been misinformed about Hamas, who've been misinformed about the Muslim Brotherhood, who've been misinformed about Islam in general. I think that it's interesting. If you talk to Islamic scholars, they tell you Islam is a religion of peace. As-salamu alaykum means peace be unto you. Shalom means peace be unto you. So, and these three, another thing that I'm working on, David and Charles, is the three Abrahamic faiths. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all say Abraham is the father. So if that's true, and it is true, why do we fight each other? Why do we kill each other? Why do we hate each other? Something has crept into our religion, something has crept into our consciousness, something has crept into how we treat one another. But as an optimist, I believe this can be solved. Now, truth has a healing element to it. But you got to hit, the Bible says the truth will set you free. That's right. But the truth doesn't come by osmosis. No. You have to work at it. You have to present it. You have to discuss
have to have others willing to seek the truth.
Exactly.
And not believe they already own the truth.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you in that context, because you mentioned Israel, some have tried to sort of simplify the whole conflict by suggesting it is a white versus non-white conflict, that Israel is somehow deemed to be a white supremacist state, and therefore the natural sympathy of people who are not white ought to be with the community of color,
yes,
who are depicted as the Palestinians. It's not true.
Right.
But nonetheless, how does someone like you with enormous influence and experience help break that simplification, which just allows people to choose sides saying, well, that's my team, not my team?
Right. I was once asked, what is my one word, simplistic, overly simplistic definition of racism and anti-Semitism? The word is ignorance. Ignorance. Anybody who thinks that Israel is a white country, a white nation, is ignorant. Anybody who thinks that all Palestinians hate Israelis is ignorant. Anybody that thinks that all Israelis hate all Palestinians, ignorance. And I think that I've been to Israel several times, and I've been most impressed with people don't even talk about the diversity in Israel. You know, the Israeli Armed Defense Force has all colors of people, all backgrounds.
You name it.
And so I think, but most people don't know that, David. So what I'm saying, our challenge throughout this discussion that we've had here on the ISGAP hour is that how do we confront the ignorance of the world? How do we confront the ignorance in America? And I believe that blacks and Jews are blessed, not cursed, to work together to challenge and replace the ignorance with truth, replace the hate with love, replace the separation with solidarity, and replace the backwardness with forward progress.
Beautifully said, and I would love for more people to know that the modern visionary of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, who of course never lived to actually see the state reborn, had written that once the Zionist project is complete, he wants to spend the rest of his life devoted to the liberation of Africa. And that a number of Israeli prime ministers, most notably Golda Meir, also very clearly said that helping to liberate and redeem Africa has to be part of the Jewish mission, and tried very hard to make sure that it was. And I'd also love for people to know, and I saw it firsthand, Benjamin, in Ethiopia, as a former director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund said at the time, I believe, when witnessing Israel go to such lengths to rescue Ethiopian Jews. I think I'm quoting him correctly, this is the first time that Africans are taken out of the continent not in chains for slavery, but on planes for liberation and freedom. And whether that's exactly accurate or not, it makes a very strong point. And so I think the solidarity that you speak of between our communities, rooted in the 1960s and the common struggle, has other dimensions, brings Israel into the picture. And as you said, we need to educate, we need to overcome ignorance. Sometimes that ignorance is innocent ignorance. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's willful ignorance.
Correct.
But we've got to do our share, and I think that's what leadership's about. It's not picking the easy issues.
Well, in some case, ignorance is profitable.
Yes.
In some case, ignorance is a political ploy to gain power.
And to keep it.
That's right. So, you know, I want to make sure that we end this discussion on the high note, not the low note. Yes, we face profound challenges, profound contradictions. But in all of these challenges and contradictions, there's always that kernel of truth that we need to focus on. Because the truth and ignorance cannot coexist in the same space. And I prefer to work on getting that truth out there and watching the dissipation of the ignorance.
Charles, you had...
Yeah, no, and apropos of this issue, one of the projects we hope to do at ISGAP is to bring young Jewish and African American people to parts of Africa, to Poland, and to Israel. And one of the things in terms of, I guess, African or Black Jewish rapprochement and working together is one of the things that I'm very fascinated by is the Jewish presence in Africa. Many people don't only see Israel as monolithic, but many people see Africa as monolithic. And it's a, it's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, rich cultural elements in Africa, throughout Africa. And one part of that tapestry of culture is a Jewish presence. And if you think about it, when the Romans conquered Israel, many Jewish people were forced into exile. We know in the Middle East that many went into Europe, but many went to Africa. And I think now in the age of internet and information, we're beginning to see the sort of the awakening of a Jewish presence in Africa, which I find fascinating. I spent Passover in Lagos, Nigeria, with the Igbo people, which was fascinating. So throughout Africa, there's a Jewish presence and an affinity to Israel and the Jewish people. So it's fascinating, and we're all kind of ignorant of that reality.
Yeah, well, you know, Nelson Mandela and I were very close friends. And most people don't know, like the NAACP, Blacks and Jews work together to found the NAACP, but most people don't know that Blacks and Jews in Africa worked together to found the ANC, the African National Congress. Even to this day, has Jewish leadership in the ANC. Most people don't know that. And worked against apartheid. And so that's why it's so, again, ignorant to try to say that Israel is an apartheid regime. First of all, they don't know what apartheid is. And the loose use of these terms is hurtful. It feeds a space where people will run with the untruths and have almost a deaf ear to the truth. So that's why we have to, you know, work on these things, to find out these traditions and again, learn from our history, you know. And I think that if more people understood human history, the evolution of human history, we wouldn't have all these difficulties that we have today.
And I'll just say for the record that I was the chairperson of the African National Solidarity Committee in Canada and the United Kingdom, and it was one of the most inspiring, gratifying parts of my political development and experience in my life. Recently, I had the great honor to travel with you to Israel and with your colleague Tish and some of the ISGAP faculty.
Yes.
We were supposed to go to Poland to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Birkenau, but because of the political situation and threats coming from elements of the Polish government to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he would go to these commemorations, we decided to go to Israel. And we had a small but spirited mission to Israel. What was your impression of being there after, since after October the 7th? You were there previously.
Yes.
What was your impression of our trip there together?
First of all, it's always good to see things firsthand. And when we went to the kibbutz that had been terrorized and destroyed by Hamas, to see somebody's home, somebody's bedroom, somebody's kitchen shot up with bullet holes, to see shoes where people trying to run from the terrorism of Hamas. It's very moving. And quite frankly, I think that most Americans have no idea of what really happened on October the 7th. If they knew, then you wouldn't have all the sympathy on some of these college campuses for Hamas. I think, terrorism begets terrorism, violence begets violence, hate begets hate, but love begets love. And I don't think there's going to be, an overnight miracle to solve the problem in Gaza or in Israel. But however, I think it can be worked on. I don't think we should have a defeatist attitude. I think my prayer is that the day that Palestinians and Israelis will live together in harmony, in peace, in mutual respect, and work together. It's that area of the world has so much potential, so much positive potential, and parts of just traveling around Israel, I saw how a desert was changed into an oasis. And again, I think that we need to work on accentuating those positive things. And yes, we have to deal with the negatives, but not let our response to the tragedies consume us where we start to mimic what we're trying to change. And that's why, going back to my days in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King forbade any of us working at SCLC to even off camera or in leisure time to say anything hateful about anybody, even though we'd just been bitten up by dogs and tear gassed and lost some of our people. And I think we should always seek the high moral ground, And the question is, how is the high moral ground defined? And I think that's another role for ISGAP to help give intellectual undergirding to what the high moral ground is in the Middle East, in Africa, in America, and all over the world. And I'm looking forward, again, optimistically to be a part of this process.
And I think, Benjamin, though I was not part of that trip, I was still recovering from surgery, but I think your presence in Israel at this time and in those places sent a very important message. And let's remember that the kibbutzes that you saw near the border were very largely the homes of peace activists who very consciously chose to live near the Gaza border as an expression of their desire for coexistence. And one of the great tragedies of October 7th was how many of those peace activists themselves were among those who, if they were lucky, fled without their shoes, but survived, but otherwise did not survive. And of course, shortly before the recording today, we had the coffins of the two babies that were returned to Israel, which was another reminder of what happened on October 7th, of course. But I think on that note, Charles, unfortunately we have to wrap it up. And if I may say so to our JVS viewers, our guest Benjamin Chavis has said that truth is our ultimate weapon and pathway. And I would fully agree with him, and if you allow me, I would only add truth combined with truthful leadership, because it all comes down to leaders, the leaders of vision and integrity, who can help take us from where we are to where we need to go. And I think, Charles, we've been blessed today in the ISGAP hour to have been joined by just such a leader.
Absolutely.
So, Benjamin, thank you for being with us. JBS viewers, we hope you've enjoyed this show. And of course, as always, we look forward to seeing you again soon. On behalf of Dr. Charles Small and myself, wishing you a good week.